It was a cold winter evening in the small mountain town of Emporium, Pennsylvania. The air was sharp, and the wind howled through the streets like a lonely song. Everyone had gone inside their homes, keeping close to their fires. Only one house still had a faint glow in its window, a small cabin on the edge of town, where Mary Whitaker lived. Mary was a quiet woman who lived alone after her father's passing. She was known for her gentle heart and helpful ways. When someone fell ill, she took them soup. When an old man ran short on coal, she shared from her own pile. People called her kind, but they also called her strange for living by herself. Still, Mary didn't mind. She found peace in her little cabin, her Bible, and the sound of the wind outside that night. As the snow fell thick and the world turned white, she heard a noise outside, a heavy thud, followed by a weak groan. At first, she thought it might be an animal, but the sound came again, low and pained. She wrapped her shawl tight, grabbed a lantern, and stepped into the freezing night. The light from her lantern caught something by the fence, a man, lying face down in the snow. His clothes were torn, his boots half buried. He wasn't moving much. Mary knelt beside him, fear and pity rising together. His skin was pale, and his lips were blue from the cold. Without thinking twice, she whispered, "Oh Lord, help me," and started pulling him toward the house. It wasn't easy. The man was tall and heavy, and the snow made every step hard. But she didn't stop. Bit by bit, she dragged him through her door and closed it behind them. Her fire had burned low, so she threw in more wood until the flames rose high. She took off his wet coat and boots, wrapped him in blankets, and rubbed his hands to bring warmth back. When his eyes finally fluttered open, he looked confused. "Where am I?" he whispered weakly. "You're safe now," Mary said softly. "You were out in the cold? You nearly froze." He looked around, blinking at the firelight. "Didn't mean to trouble you, ma'am," he said. "My horse slipped near the ridge. I walked until I couldn't." Mary smiled a little. "You'd have walked straight into heaven if I hadn't found you. Rest now." She gave him a bit of warm broth and stayed by his side until he fell asleep again. The sound of his breathing steadied, and only then did she sit down, feeling her tired arms ache. She looked at the stranger rough hands, a scar near his temple, maybe a man used to hard work. Whoever he was, she was glad she had opened her door. The next morning, he was awake and sitting by the fire. "I'm Daniel Holt," he said. "Been traveling west for work?" "I was headed toward the lumber camp." Mary nodded kindly. "You'll stay until you're strong again?" "The snow hasn't stopped yet." He tried to protest, but his body still trembled from the cold. She waved off his thanks. "No need for words," she said. "Just heal." For the next few days, the snow kept falling. Daniel helped when he could, chopping wood or fixing a broken chair. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was gentle. Mary found herself smiling again, something she hadn't done much in years. The cabin felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from company. But small towns have sharp eyes and quicker tongues. It didn't take long before someone noticed the man's boots outside Mary's porch. The first to mention it was Mrs. Hargreaves, the postmaster's wife, who stopped by one morning. She brought bread and a basket of apples, but her smile was thin. "My, Mary," she said lightly, "I saw a pair of boots by your door this morning. You've taken in a lodger?" Mary wiped her hands on her apron. A traveler collapsed in the snow. "I couldn't leave him out there." Of course," said Mrs. Hargreaves, her eyes twinkling. "Such a kind woman you are. Still, people may wonder. You know how this town likes to talk?" Mary's heart sank. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew how fast rumors spread in Emporium. That evening, when she went to fetch flour from the shop, she felt the air change. The clerk avoided her eyes. The blacksmith's wife turned away. She heard whispers as she passed, soft, ugly things. "Mary's got a man living with her. So that's how she keeps warm at night." By the time she reached home, her hands were shaking. She didn't tell Daniel what she'd heard. He was sitting by the fire, patching a hole in his coat. He looked up and smiled. "You've been good to me, Miss Mary," he said. "When the weather clears, I'll be on my way." She forced a smile. "You'll go when you're ready," she said. But deep down she felt both sadness and relief. A week passed, and the whispers grew louder. At church, people moved their seats away from her. The preacher's wife, who once invited her for tea, now only gave a short nod. After the sermon, as Mary was leaving, the woman stopped her. "Miss Whittaker," she said, kindly but firmly, "a woman's reputation is a delicate thing. Perhaps it would be better if your guest found lodging elsewhere." Mary's throat tightened. "He was half dead when I found him," she said quietly. "Would you have shut your door on him?" The preacher's wife sighed. "We must think of appearances, dear." Mary left without another word. That night, she sat by the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel noticed her silence. "They've been talking, haven't they?" he said softly. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she nodded. "They twist kindness into sin. I helped a man in need, and now they call it shame." Looked into the flames. "If my staying here brings you trouble, I'll leave tomorrow." Her eyes lifted to his. "No," she said. "You'll stay till you're well. I won't turn kindness into cruelty just to make them quiet." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. There was respect in his gaze, and something like sorrow. "You're a good woman, Mary," he said. "Maybe too good for this town." The next morning, as she fetched water from the well, she saw 2 women from town watching from a distance. They whispered behind their scarves and laughed. Mary's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. She would not bow to gossip. She had done what any decent person should do. Still, at night, when the wind howled and the town lights glowed in the distance, she felt the sting of loneliness stronger than before. Her heart asked why kindness could turn to pain so quickly. Daniel noticed her sadness. "One evening," he said, "when the thaw comes, I'll move west. Maybe by then, folks will forget." She nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll remember longer than truth lasts. But it doesn't matter. I know what I did was right." He smiled faintly. "Then let them talk. The world needs more hearts like yours." The snow outside kept falling, wrapping the world in white silence. Inside, the firelight flickered across their faces. 2 people the world had judged without understanding. Neither of them knew that soon. The same townsfolk who turned their backs would come knocking at Mary's door. The winter had more storms to bring. The snow kept falling for days. The town of Emporium was covered in a deep white blanket, and even the strongest horses struggled to walk through the drifts. Food was running short. The roads were blocked, and wagons couldn't reach the town. People began to worry as the cold grew stronger each night. Mary Whittaker's little cabin standing near the woods still had firewood and a few sacks of flour. Daniel Holt, though still weak, worked hard every day to help her. He chopped wood until his hands blistered and fixed broken shutters so the cold wind wouldn't creep inside. One morning, Mary saw smoke from the direction of town. Not the soft gray of fireplaces, but thick, dark smoke. Fear rushed through her. She wrapped her shawl and hurried down the path. Daniel followed close behind. When they reached Main Street, they saw that the roof of the bakery was on fire. People were shouting and running in panic, throwing snow onto the flames. The wind was fierce, and no one could control it. The baker's wife cried as the flames spread to the next building. Daniel didn't stop to think. He ran toward the fire, grabbed a bucket, and joined the men fighting it. Mary saw him disappear into the smoke, and her heart trembled with fear. After what felt like forever, the flames began to die. The bakery was ruined, but the fire hadn't spread farther. The townspeople stood in the snow, coughing and shivering. Mary saw Daniel's face blackened with soot, his hands raw from the cold water. He had saved 2 children who had been trapped near the back. People stared at him with surprise, not knowing who he was. The preacher came forward. "Son, you risked your life," he said with respect. "Who are you?" Daniel wiped his face. "Just a man who owed a debt," he said quietly. "I was dying in the snow when Miss Whittaker took me in. If not for her, I wouldn't be standing here." Everyone turned to Mary. For a long time, no one spoke. The same women who had whispered about her now looked ashamed. The preacher's wife lowered her eyes. Mrs. Hargreaves clutched her shawl and turned red. The truth had hit them harder than the cold wind. That evening, when Mary returned home, she found a basket left on her porch, bread, cheese, and apples. There was a note tied with a ribbon that said, "Thank you for saving him and for reminding us what kindness is." She didn't know who left it, but she smiled for the first time in many days. The next morning, someone knocked at her door. It was the preacher himself, holding his hat in his hands. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I came to apologize. This town judged too quickly. You showed mercy when others would have turned away. If there's anything we can do—" Mary shook her head gently. "No apology needed. I only did what anyone should have done." "Not anyone, Miss Whitaker. Few would have done the same." After that, the town's heart began to change. People started bringing her food, wood, and even small gifts. The children she used to help waved when they saw her. The gossip was gone, replaced by quiet respect. As the snow began to melt and spring crept in, Daniel grew strong again. He started working at the lumber mill, and the men there spoke of his skill and honesty. Yet he still returned to Mary's cabin every evening, helping her with chores or fixing the roof that leaked when the ice melted. They had grown used to each other's company, two lonely souls who had found comfort in the same warm fire. One night, they sat outside watching the sky turn golden with sunset. Daniel looked thoughtful. "Mary," he said, "you gave me more than warmth. You gave me a new life. I want to tell you the truth about my past." She turned to him, quiet and calm. "Go on. I wasn't just a traveler," he said slowly. "I used to work for a railroad company down south. There was an accident, not my fault, but I was blamed. I lost my job and everything I owned. I left to find work where no one knew my name. I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Then I met you." Mary listened without judgment. "The past doesn't matter," she said softly. "It's what you do now that counts." He smiled, relief in his eyes. "Then maybe I'll stay here if you don't mind. Emporium could use a man who knows how to build and repair. And I could use a friend who knows how to keep the firewood stacked," she said with a small laugh. In time, Daniel became part of the town. The same people who once avoided him now waved when he passed. The preacher even asked him to help rebuild the bakery that had burned. He worked hard, and the people began to trust him. But everyone knew that the real change started with Mary. Her act of kindness had turned a stranger into a hero and a cold town into a kinder place. Months later, as summer came and the hills turned green again, the townsfolk gathered for a picnic by the river. Mary stood near the water, watching the children play. Mrs. Hargreaves came up to her looking shy. "Mary," she said, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to talk the way I did. You showed more faith than any of us." Mary smiled gently. "We all learn lessons in our own time." At that moment, Daniel approached, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to Mary and nodded politely to Mrs. Hargreaves. The woman smiled awkwardly and walked away. As the afternoon sun shone on the river, Mary looked around and saw how peaceful everything had become. The town that once whispered against her now greeted her with kindness. She realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone for a while, but in the end, the truth always found its way home. Later that evening, when the picnic ended, Daniel walked her back to the cabin. The fireflies glowed softly in the fields, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "Funny how things turned out," he said. "I came here half frozen, and now this place feels like home." Mary looked at him with a smile that reached her eyes. "That's what kindness does," she said quietly. "It makes strangers feel like they belong." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "If you'll have me, I'd like to stay here for good. I'll build you a new barn, help you with the land, and keep the fire burning when winter comes again." Mary didn't speak for a moment. Her heart felt full. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel," she said softly. He shook his head. "Maybe not. But I want to stay because I care." The next morning, people in town saw smoke rising gently from Mary's chimney again, as it always had. But this time, they smiled when they saw it. The woman they once judged had become a quiet symbol of goodness. Her story was told again and again, how she took in a freezing man when no one else would, how the town turned against her, and how her kindness changed everything. Years later, children in Emporium would still point to the little cabin near the woods and say, That's where Miss Mary lived, the woman who saved a man and taught the town what real kindness means. Inside that cabin, 2 lives continued peacefully. Mary read by the fire, and Daniel worked outside, humming as he chopped wood. The world beyond might still hold gossip and cruelty. But inside that home, warmth and goodness had found their place forever. And though the snow would fall again each winter, it never felt as cold as before.